It's a very, very beautiful day for Healthcare Unfiltered today because, first of all, I have one of my dear friends and someone I've admired for a long time. And it is also his first time. You're like a Healthcare Unfiltered newbie.
I love being the newbie. I got to tell you, this is great. It's like the maiden voyage of my unfiltered
Yeah, it's
experience.
like your first time coming into
Looking
this
forward to being on.
unfiltered territory.
I love it.
The good thing about this, Joe, is you literally can say whatever you want. Like, I have nobody that edits this, like, nobody filters this. Like, if you're mad at something, just say the F word, man. No problem.
Well, I'm not much of an F word kind of guy, but I will express my emotions because I'm an over communicator, as you know.
Yes. So, look, I am honestly very excited about this in all seriousness, because you have such an amazing background and diverse interests. And that's really why I've actually called this episode, it's just a fireside chat between me and you, because there's so much we can talk about. And I'm gonna tease the audience a lot. I mean, you're just we're not gonna give them everything. We're gonna just start by knowing who is Joe Mikhael, because after this, I'm gonna talk about 4 or 5 specific areas that have always intrigued me about you. But if somebody asks you who you are, how would you answer that?
Well, I'm simply Dr. Joe. That's what they
Oh, I
often
like that.
the patients call me. My hashtag is hashtag where is Dr. Joe. Um, and it kind of captures a bit of me because one, obviously I'm very committed to my profession. I love being a doctor. I grew up in a family of doctors. My mother to this day remains my hero. She was a woman who went to medical school when women didn't go to med school. She paved the way. 100 people in her class, 3 were women. So she knows what it's like to be a trailblazer. But then I also like the fact that it's Dr. Joe because I'm just Joe. I don't need the pomp and the circumstance. At the end of the day, I love doing all the different things that we get to do for our patients around the world. I have a very international focus to my life. But yet, at the end of the day, we just love taking care of people. And it's not about the title, it's not about the position. I don't need people to stand at attention and say, "Hello, Dr. Mikhael, how are you today?" It's just Dr. Joe. And to me, when people ask me who I am, I like to say that you're not necessarily what you do, right? Me being a doctor is what I do. Who I really am as Dr. Joe is husband to the most incredible woman in the world, father to 2 beautiful daughters that I love immensely, and someone who just embraces life. I cannot, I don't know how people can do the work we do, Shadi, and not soak up the marrow of life, spoken like a real hematologist, right? But we see patients die every day. I mean, I had a
Yeah.
conversation with a patient this week. I know they're not going to make it through the summer, and how can I not be grateful for what I have? So
Yeah.
if there's one word that I try to that expresses much of my life, is I'm thankful, and I really try to approach life that way.
Was your mom the inspiration to go into medicine? Is it just watching her and seeing her what led you through the medical path?
It was really both of my parents. So it was my mom on the side of education. She actually ultimately became a dean. She ultimately became a head of a department, and then she was the director of education for the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. So, I mean, she's just an incredible achievement, and still is going on strong, and still mentors young women and does incredible things. So she was the motivation as the teacher, the educator side of it, because I love education. As you know, I did a master's in education. I'm privileged. Even this week, there's a an award in my name in Canada for people who are
Oh, good
committed
for
to
you.
education in Canada. And I've just interacted. They always give it every year to a fellow and to a staff person. And so my mom was clearly the inspiration for that. And then at the same time, I was that kid that my father took to rounds on Saturdays. When he went to go see his patients on Saturday, he would come and plant me at the nurse's station, or I would sit in the doctor's lounge and he would see patients. And I learned from him, he was a urologist, but I learned from him that incredible dedication to patients. He adored his patients. He would do anything for them. He was the old school physician. He did the surgeries when other surgeons didn't want to do it, big prostate cancer challenges that he took on. He had both an academic and a community practice. And so the merger of those two, they were really my heroes of life. They were also, my father's passed away now tragically of colon cancer, but they were also motivational to me by being the most generous people I've ever met in my life. If I said to them, Shadi's my friend, and they'd be like, Shadi, come on over for dinner. I'll make you a malachaya. I'll treat you. I'll feed you. I'll love on you. It was only actually after my father passed away that I realized how many people he was supporting around the world, poor individuals. And so he was that motivation to me to be a great clinician and to give back. They came from very poor means in Egypt and built a life for themselves, and they wanted to make it better for others.
God bless his soul. Joe, were you born here or in Egypt? You were born in
I was born
Canada.
in Canada, actually. So my parents met in medical school, were married in Egypt. I have one brother, one sibling, my older brother, Sam, and he was born in Egypt in 66. And then that was the time of Suez Canal crisis and issues. And so my parents went to do fellowships in London, England, and then decided to go from England to Canada. And so I came out in Canada. So I was born in the early 70s in Canada and lived there until I moved to the US about 18 years ago.
And I know that your command of the Arabic Egyptian language definitely starts with the word Habibi. We knew that you know the word Habibi, but do you actually, are you fluent? Do you speak Egyptian
I
Arabic?
wouldn't say I'm fluent. When I was young, my parents would speak to me in Arabic and I would answer in English, but they also sent me to French immersion. So je parle français aussi. I speak French. I'm
Vraiment?
in, absolument. And so even when I did my medical school and residency in Ottawa, Canada, which is the capital, back in the day, I used to ski with Justin Trudeau. We were ski buddies together back in the day. And so I do speak French. I don't get to use it as
By
much.
the way, it depends who's listening to this podcast. Is either we lost everybody now turned off now that
I
you're friends with
know.
just, or we got, I don't know. I mean, who's listening? But anyway.
Suffice to say that we skied together in 7th and 8th grade, and I haven't seen him since. So let me leave it at that. But so I learned French and I spoke French. My spoken Arabic is weak. If I go back to the Middle East and give lectures, I did this morning. I gave a talk virtually in Dubai this morning. I throw a few words in there here and there, and I understand what's being said. But when it comes to being fluent, that's only English and French.
It's very difficult. Like I was trying to think, like, what is even multiple myeloma in Arabic? I'm not sure I know. Do you even know what's
No,
the?
that's a good
I don't
question.
even know, right? I mean, like certain things, I'm not sure I know. So obviously you're inspired by your dad, by your mom. You went to medical school in Canada. And then what happened after that? You stayed there. When did you come to the US? How did you decide to become a hematologist oncologist?
Oh wow! So great question. So in brief, so I went to medical school in Ottawa, the city I grew up in, and I was motivated I was actually very close to becoming a cardiologist. I really enjoyed the cardiology group, but I just found it a little bit redundant after a while. And then I had a great mentor who was actually the man who was teaching us physical exam skills, Chris Bredesen. He's still in Canada as a hematologist. He's a malignant hematologist. There's a lot of transplant. He was the president of the American Society of Transplant Cellular Therapy a few years ago, and so I got very fascinated by hematology because I really enjoyed the taking care of very sick people, but also being able to understand the science behind it. That sort of intrigued me. And so I did my residency and decided to do hematology and really wanted to do it in a different city because I think it's good to train different places. And so that's how I moved to Toronto. And so I did my hematology fellowship in Toronto while I was there. I did an additional year. I did a master's in education because I always had this duality to my career is that I was
What does that mean? Tell us, like, master, does it focus on methodology? Like what do they teach you when you do masters of education? What are they trying? They want to teach you methodology or what?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with education methodology and just higher level of approach to education in the law. I did a lot of my courses in the law and just understanding because the historical model of academic medicine in Canada was really, I think, one of the world leaders in medical education is that you can be a clinician teacher where you actually, teach the residents and fellows and students on your service, and that's marvelous. But the clinician educator is a little bit different. They're the people building curricula. Those are the individuals that are doing research in education, right? That are understanding methodologies and approaches and systems. And I'd always been fascinated by that. I even went into sort of medical politics. So I was, president of our resident association and that kind of thing. And so I did my master's of education alongside of myeloma, which was a little bit unconventional. I did a myeloma fellowship as well, but it was a little bit unconventional because a lot of people do epidemiology or sometimes an MBA perhaps, or a master's in public health, or in as I mentioned, in business administration. But that gave me this opportunity. And so since then in my career, I've been a program director, I was a postgraduate dean at Mayo and so on. I've been able to keep that education gene turned on while still doing clinical investigation. And my mentor in Toronto was Keith Stewart. And so Keith was really one of the world experts in myeloma. And then he left Toronto to go to Mayo Clinic here in Arizona. And a couple of years later, he convinced me to move down to Arizona and join him, which I did. Ironically, he's now back in Toronto, became the cancer center director, and he still wants me to go back. He's like, "Right, Joe, you can do your work from here." And I'm like, Keith,
That's
man,
a very good Irish accent, let me tell you.
Scottish. Careful, don't call him Irish,
Oh,
man.
is it Scottish? I actually thought he was Irish. Oh, I hope he's not.
No,
Well, it's okay. If he's listening now, he should just, yeah.
Scottish. I love the man. He's brilliant, and despite his sometimes gruff approach, he's very kind-hearted. He's a beautiful person. I told him, listen, Keith, man, I followed you to a different country once. I'm not going to do it again. That's like stalker status, man.
Yeah.
So Mayo Clinic invited me, and I was very influenced by people like Rafael Fonseca, who continues to be a very close friend, Vincent Rajkumar and Maury Gertz, who gave me the choice. Do I want to go to Mayo, Arizona or Mayo, Rochester? And, Mayo, Rochester is the big hub. It's the center of activity. Mayo, Arizona is kind of one of the colonies out here. But I wanted to build something. I wanted to be a part of something that was growing and building. And so I didn't move to the frozen cornfield of Minnesota and decided to come to Arizona. And I've lived here ever since, and I love it. And I had 10 beautiful years at Mayo. Loved working at Mayo Clinic.
Then what did you do?
Well, then, I had been working alongside of the folks at the International Myeloma Foundation, Dr. Brian Dury in particular. We had done a meeting together in China. I distinctly remember it. And I remember looking at Brian, who's now in his 80s. And I said, Brian, you look a little tired, man. You're working hard. And they, at the same time, he and his board were looking for him to have a number two, as it were. And so this opportunity opened up, and I thought to myself, I loved working at Mayo. It was a marvelous place. I didn't want to just treat rich people in Scottsdale. I mean, Scottsdale. That I can say anything.
It's okay. It's healthcare unfiltered. Perfect.
Yeah. and the IMF really wanted someone who had credibility in myeloma, who had an international focus, who's dedicated to patient and professional education. So it was just a hand in glove fit. And so 6 years ago, I joined the IMF. I wanted to retain a clinical and academic practice. And so I considered joining City of Hope in Los Angeles, because, the IMF is based in Los Angeles. But at the time, City of Hope also owned TGen here in Phoenix, the Translational Genomics Research Institute, and we have a clinic that's affiliated, something called the Honor Health Research Institute. So it worked out well. I end up doing a clinic 10 minutes away from my home. I have this academic appointment at TGen, where we have a beautiful myeloma lab, and then I have this full-time job as the Chief Medical Officer of the International Myeloma Foundation. So I really have 2, if not 3 jobs. It keeps me super, super busy. But I love it. I can still do phase 1 clinical trials and some phase 2. I still see patients. A lot of my patients, Shadi, being here in Phoenix, as you know, because you have a Phoenix connection as well, that it's a huge city, 5-6 million people without a major academic center. So most of the oncology is still done by community oncologists, and they want someone to help guide their myeloma treatment. So I see a lot of second or expert opinions and guide the care that's given by the community oncologists.
So I want to delve into a couple of your roles, because they're very intriguing to me. One is the IMF as Chief Medical Officer. What is it that you do day in and day out? What is it, what are the milestones or the things that you would like to achieve for the IMF as Chief Medical Officer? How would you look back and say, okay, I was successful in this? Give me the blueprints of what you're trying to accomplish as a CMO of the IMF.
See, this is why you're Shadi. I mean, you think about this kind of stuff, man. I love that. It's very kind of you to take an interest in what my vision or blueprint would be. I mean, that's why people love listening to you, because you don't just talk about yourself. You really want others. So I commend you in that, my friend. It's wonderful. I mean, I think for me, this was an incredible organization built over 30 years ago, built at a time when patients were not told to have a conversation with their doctors or ask questions of their doctors. You know, it was, here, dear, take this pill. Trust me, I'm your doctor. And Brian and Susie Dury built a phenomenon of empowering their patients to do more, but also at the same time bringing together the myeloma community in a way that had never been brought together before. The International Myeloma Working Group was a brilliant endeavor to really bring together the minds, things that you couldn't do on your own. So when I think of what I want to achieve at the IMF, I always say, whether it's my personal institution, my affiliation at ASH, or importantly, my work at the IMF, what is the superpower that we have? What is it that we can do that otherwise couldn't be done, right? You don't want to reproduce the ASH annual meeting. You don't want to reproduce other meetings. You created your fantastic meeting that we had in Chicago a few weeks ago because it was unique. It was special. It was bringing something together that others wouldn't do. And so when I think of what I want to do at the IMF, I think of it in two ways. One way, I really would love to elevate so much of what we're already doing. You know, the IMF was built on 4 pillars of research, education, support, and advocacy. And I want to give those all an upgrade, you know, that are upgrading our educational programs to patients, to primary care doctors, to the community, upping our research game and being able to bring collaborative efforts. You know, they do great work at Mayo Clinic and Dana-Farber and MD Anderson and all over the world. But what else can we do together that we couldn't do on our own? And, you know, similarly for advocacy, for support. So I wanted to up the game of what we were doing, bring it to another level, but also to expand what we're doing. So, and you asking me what I do day in, day out, almost 50% of my time is dedicated now to health disparities. You know, myeloma is the most disparate cancer within the African-American community. As an Egyptian, I'm African-American. I'm not considered Black. I wouldn't be viewed as being Black, but I'm African-American. My genes are very similar to those that we know put us at twice the high risk of developing myeloma. A Black man or a Black woman diagnosed today with myeloma are expected to live half as long as the same aged white man, white woman. That's totally unacceptable. So we work very hard at understanding the drivers of that in the community and the society that we have, but also addressing the delayed diagnosis and the lack of access to care, which I think are the greatest 2 myeloma drivers of it. So we've developed this Empower program where we work community by community, but also nationally, and we partner with everybody, Shadi, to try and overcome these disparities. I work with whether it's the National Medical Association, the Black Doctor Association, or the rapper Ice-T. You know, he did a campaign with us and I got to meet with him, whether it's with comedians or politicians, in churches or in healthcare centers. We do everything we can to raise awareness around myeloma. People know the signs and symptoms so they can talk to their doctor, help the doctors make the accurate diagnosis, and facilitate the care of patients.
How does the IMF get resources to mitigate these disparities? Because obviously, after you identify the reasons, you have to develop strategies to overcome that. Is it supported by government, by pharma, by both, or by philanthropy? Like, how do you maintain the operations day in and day out?
Absolutely. So, you know, my favorite answer to almost every question is all of the above.
All of the above, of course.
All of the above. So we write grants. We seek from pharma, from non-pharma. We have an incredible development department now that it looks for greater philanthropic effort. Sometimes the government supports. I mean, last month, we did a program with the state of Indiana of educating Black men in barbershops across the country. They have a barbershop health outreach day where barbershops choose a day of the month and they give out health information. They'd never done that for myeloma.
Why barbershops?
Barbershops throughout the state of Indiana.
No, but why barbershops?
Because that's very often where Black men in particular, will go and have conversations with their friends. They tend to trust their barber. Yeah. It's almost like a social activity, an event. And so you take that opportunity to say, hey, have you talked about your health? Have you thought about this? Do you need to get lung cancer screening? Do you need to get prostate cancer screening? That pain you've had in your side for 2 months, maybe someone needs to talk about or look into that. You've been more tired than usual. So I just give that as one example. So we do these programs funded really across the board. And then lastly, I really want to put also the I into IMF, which we already have, of course, is international. And my Canadian blood partly dictates this, but I really want to help people in very poor countries. I just came off a call of speaking to someone from Latin America. And so I'm leading efforts in Latin America right now where we've created something called the Latin American Myeloma Network. These are myeloma doctors from multiple countries in Latin America where we can do things that otherwise they wouldn't be able to do as individual countries. Educational programs, but also clinical trials. So we have our first clinical trial that we hope to launch in the next couple of months, where it's going to provide access to drugs for poorer people that don't have the funds. In these countries, it is very much the have and have not. And we've demonstrated this principle in Asia. We've done it in Asia for almost a decade now. And my dream is to do it in Latin America and also to do it in Africa, where we do, Shadi, these aren't earth-shattering clinical trials that are answering massive medical questions, but they are kind of like expanded access trials, but also generating local data. We are beginning to learn there's a different pattern, Age of diagnosis in myeloma is very different based on your race and ethnicity. And so when I think of the impact I want to leave at the IMF is to elevate the operation in many respects with the amazing people that are there. It's incredible, as by the way, as a myeloma doctor, that my boss is a myeloma patient. Yelek Beru is our president and CEO.
Yeah,
He's a
I've
piece
seen
of
him.
man, originally from Ethiopia, and has a tremendous story to share. But I also want to expand these programs so that we can reach people that have historically not been reached, whether it's the African American community, the Latino and Hispanic American community here in the US, or communities that don't have the same access to healthcare that we do in Latin America and Africa and Middle East and other places.
A lot of the work that you are doing in the disparities, especially on the global front, it will take years to see, honestly, any fruits to the labor. Everybody who has worked in this understands this. Have you seen something that, over the past 2, 3 years that is giving you some hope that these disparities that you are witnessing and you're passionate about are starting to be mitigated a little bit, or are we still, I guess, in the discovery phase of what's going on? Are we seeing some trend? Sometimes one of the curves I always like is, when the American Cancer Society prints, for example, their yearly thing and shows the mortality of particular cancer starting to come down and things like that. It makes you feel really good. Are you starting to see something in the myeloma world in the underrepresented minorities?
I really do think we are. I think the strategy, and you captured, as you always do, so clearly and so fully, is that, after terrible things happened a few years ago with the pandemic and people had a greater interest in health equity, there was this desire to sort of have quick fixes, right? It was sort of the hot topic of the day. You could write papers about it. You could get grants about it. People created DEI councils, and there's nothing wrong with them. I chaired 2 different DEI councils, in fact. But there's a lot of work on what can we kind of just make look good now. And I feel that the answer was both short and long term. And I've already been encouraged by some of what we've seen, because I think we have started to move that needle. We are seeing greater representation of African Americans in clinical trials. We've seen greater emphasis on reporting race and ethnicity, as we understand, even in my world of myeloma, we are seeing differences by race and ethnicity in rates of cytokine release syndrome, in rates of neurological toxicities, in the severity of them. And we need to understand this better. And people are finally looking at that. So yes, we are to some degree still in the discovery stage, but at the same time, we are having direct impact on people. I think of one of the programs we created, Shadi, which arguably is my favorite of all the programs. It's called Medical Student Scholars for Health Equity in Myeloma. These are medical students from historically underrepresented communities. Many of them are from historical Black colleges and universities. And what we do is they apply for it, of course, and we do this with the National Medical Association and their research arm, the Cobb Institute. So we select 12 students. These are incredible students too, by the way. And I pair them with 12 myeloma experts, and you would know many of these people who are not only myeloma experts, but myeloma experts who also have an interest in um, uh, health disparities. Um, and for 5 months, they do a research project together virtually. And then at the end of that, which is going to come now in August, we all meet at the annual meeting of the National Medical Association. And each of these students has a poster that they present their research on. So we're creating a sense of community. And my thought is these medical students, of course, I'd love them all to become myeloma doctors, but whatever they become, cardiologists, surgeons, nephrologists, whatever they do, they're now sensitized to how myeloma affects their community.
Right.
And the importance of health disparities, and seeing them, and you know how invigorating it is to see trainees, right? Seeing them excited. One of our medical students got interviewed on the news the other day because they heard word of her getting selected for this scholarship, and it's marvelous to see. And I think we are seeing a generation of physicians, because it is going to take time. You're absolutely right. Right, we're just planting seeds but I'm already starting to see sprouts. I'm already starting to see small fruit born in these students, but also in the patients that we care for. As I go from church to church, I'm doing an event next month in Harlem at the huge Abyssinian Baptist Church, where we've done Juneteenth activities. Last year we were at Riverside Church, and as people learn about this disease, they understand how it affects their community. They say, well, I can go and talk to my doctor if this is happening or that's happening. I understand the resources available to me because I have a cousin with myeloma and I want to help them. All of these things, I think, have a short-term benefit, but hopefully a bigger, longer-term benefit.
Talking about medical students, Joe, and this thing, it's really great segue to your other passion of education, because for those who are listening, they are watching, they probably got to know that you were a fellowship program director at some point in Mayo Clinic, Arizona, for the fellowship program, correct?
Yeah. So when I came in and joined, I'd been very much involved in medical education, having done the master's and so on in Toronto. And then when I came as an assistant program director. I became the program director for the Hematology Oncology Fellowship at Mayo, Arizona, and then actually became the associate dean. I became the postgraduate dean for all of Mayo, Arizona. So all of the fellowship programs, whether it was surgery or medicine or other, and it was a real privilege. We sometimes forget how much of a privilege it is to educate and to carve a path for these students. And, we can sometimes get into this generational way of thinking, oh, they don't work as hard as we did. We did more call. We did more.
Well, Joe, look, nobody ever works harder than me. I'm just saying, for those who are listening.
Humility brought to you all the time.
But one of the things about education, forget a little bit the disease and treatment and pathobiology. These are all important. But communication is very, very important part of that part. And I actually just aired an episode with Dr. Chandana Banerjee, who is a dean at City of Hope, about end-of-life care discussions and communication, all of this. But the reality is communication between physicians and patients, between physicians and physicians, are very important. And there's an art to it. And I know that this is a very, very, very dear topic to your heart, but and you've done a lot of it. So before you tell us about how you handled and trained people to respond to some of the difficult questions when you worked for the Canadian Broadcasting Company, that's how I hear. You've done it all, man. It's crazy. But how do you teach fellows communication? I did my fellowship. I was never trained about this. I picked bits and pieces from my attendings, how they did something, sit on the bedside, talk, how they talk. And then I crafted my own brand of how I communicate with people. But do you think there's a value of really like a curriculum? We teach fellows and students everything in medicine. It seems like we don't really teach them how to communicate. And I don't know if we can, to be honest. I'm not really sure there's a way to teach. I think I've watched Steve Rosen, for example, one of my mentors, how he communicated. He gave his cell number to every single patient. And I did the same. When I became an attending, every patient had my cell number when we had cell phones. But help me out. You are a fellowship program director. You had to teach certain things. You had to design the curriculum. And from there, I want to learn a little bit about, I heard you taught some politicians how to respond to certain things.
Well, it's a strategy. You're so kind. It's a strategy. So I do actually think that we have to, first and foremost, elevate the importance of communication and recognize that as a physician, you're not there to just be smart and be able to figure out a diagnosis or just be good with your hands and cut out the tumor or whatever it is you're doing surgically. Our responsibility primarily really is a communication one. So this is how I believe that we can do it better. And what I try to do, Shadi, is one, as I said from the very start, talk about the importance of communication. So I had a medical student in clinic with me yesterday. I'd never met her before. She was a new student to our rotation, and she's going to do several clinics with me. And right from the very start, this is how I started the conversation after we got to know each other a little bit. I said, Shadi, I said, when you're with me in clinic, there's two things I want you to learn. I want you to learn a little bit about myeloma, understand it, understand how we approach it, so that whatever you do, and she actually is somewhat interested in eventually doing oncology, so it is probably particularly important. But I said, number two, I want you to learn communication. I want it to be a priority when you're with me, because you may forget about plasma cells, but hopefully you won't forget about the importance I place on communication, how I communicate with my team, how I communicate with my patients, how I communicate with my peers. And so laying that out at the start is number one. Number two is role modeling it yourself. Is demonstrating to them the importance of it. And even in a single clinic, she's like, wow, you really do get close to your patients. You take more time taking a social history than most doctors do, because it's important to me. Often that's where I start. I don't start with the history of the present illness and go through the algorithm. I want to know who these people are. I want to know the names of their pets. I want to know the names of their grandchildren.
When did you know you wanted that? Like, my question is, were you influenced by somebody? Because it's hard for me to believe you're a medical
people. Right. Robert Buckman in particular, who's an amazing oncologist at Princess Margaret Hospital. He himself had actually worked with Monty Python back in the day in England and then became an oncologist. And he was both hilarious and a brilliant communicator, and really opened my eyes to the magic of communication and how important it was. And he did a lot of work in palliative care. And so that's what turned me onto it. And so I want to role model it. And then just to complete the story, number three, so elevating its importance, role modeling it, but then number three, actually talking about it afterwards, right? It's like the surgeon that can say, here, come stand beside me, watch how I cut this, watch how I stitch this. But it's another thing to walk them through it and be very meticulous and say, did you notice when we were in the room how I did this or how I did that? Let's debrief a little bit. Let's not just debrief about why we chose carfilzomib as the drug together in shared decision-making, but let's debrief on the communication part. Whether it was with the patient, with the nurse practitioner, the PA, the pharmacist, the social worker, the janitor, whomever was present as we did our rounds. That to me is very important, because it closes the loop. It doesn't just say do as I do. It's do as I do, but here, let me tell you why I do. And then lastly, to encourage people to, just what you said, carve their own path of communication. You don't have to do it Dr. Joe's way, right? You might say there's only one way to listen to the heart on the correct side of the patient to the bedside, and this is how we test for whispered bacteriloquy or whatever, things that you and I had to learn in medical school. But when it comes to communication, it's different. And so I think people have to develop their own style. Like, you take a humorous style, you take a very conversational, casual style. That's the way Shadi is. Some people take a more formal style, but you have to live in your own skin. And then maybe lastly, if I can add a bonus thing, is that I think we also need didactic lectures on this. I give, in fact, when I was back at Mayo, we had an approach where every month I would meet with the residents and fellows and do communication skills workshops and lectures. And I would give talks on whether it was communicating with patients. I also did the same with the nurses, whether it's communicating with patients or how to give a talk. Actually, in fact, my favorite talk is called A Talk on a Talk. And I give Dr. Joe's top 10 tips of what you do when you give a talk, everything from managing your PowerPoint presentation to the use of humor. You know, there is a curriculum of these things. There, yes, we can do it differently,
Yeah.
but I want people to think it's just as important for you to know the differential diagnosis of hypercalcemia as it is to know how I'm going to communicate with this patient. And sometimes, you know, it prepares you for the challenging stuff. I was not ever on the payroll for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, but I was an informal correspondent for them. And
How did that happen? How did that happen?
I just started getting into it. I was president of the Resident Association and kept getting involved. I gave my cell phone number to some of the folks at the CBC, and I would just get these calls. And so whether it's, you know, more often than not, fielding fun, happy, good calls about, oh, look, this new CAR T-cell therapy was approved in myeloma. You know, I sit on the ASH Media Expert Committee. You know, we can answer questions, and sometimes it's dealing with challenging situations. You know, and so I help train the ASH executive on how to pivot, you know, and how to deal with difficult situations. But more often,
okay, let's do an example right here. Let me see. You are an ASH executive, and I'm really an aggressive reporter right here. You know, Dr. Mikhael, I saw a report yesterday that you are agreeing to everything the ABIM is saying. And as you know, 100% of your constituents are not in alignment with the ABIM. How do you respond to that, Dr. Mikhael?
Well, that's a very important point, that we always want to do what our constituents are directing us to do. And that's why we have developed an entire initiative, a subcommittee, a whole force of individuals at ASH that are systematically addressing the issue of MOC so that we can provide our members the kind of support that they need to deal with this issue, because no one likes the current situation. Everyone believes that the current situation has to change, and we want to be a part of that change to make sure it's effective, to keep our patients safe, but most importantly, but also to make sure our members are satisfied in the jobs that they have.
See,
Something
that's
like
very
that.
nice. Yeah, not bad. That's true.
You
And you
want to be
maintained your
aggressive.
cool and composure.
You don't ever fight fire with fire, you know. But you know, that is a hot topic, of course. And let me tell you, the ASH is on fire for
No,
MO.
I know. I've actually did a podcast episode of this with Brodsky and with Mikhael Sikiers, who we know his name is not spelled properly.
Correct. He doesn't spell Mikhail correctly, but you know, we give him honorable
But
mention.
he's still a nice guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody is trying. I also interviewed Dr. Hades, the CEO of ASCO, about the topic. I think there are, what I gathered is at some point things are going to be changed, but I don't think we're going to have no MOC whatsoever.
I think this is one example, if I may, where I think we can learn a little bit from our Canadian friends. So I maintain my certification in Canada, not because I do an exam every year or every 5 years,
Right.
because we have a multi-modality approach where I have to earn a certain number of points on an annual and a 5-year cycle that honestly, Shadi, reflects what I do, right? Whether it's attending conferences, whether it's doing literature searches, whether I want to answer a question that comes up in clinic, whether I'm writing a paper, whether I'm doing a joint project with others, all of these things derive benefit and points. And as I upload those, and it's not an onerous process, those points are awarded to me, and I don't have to repeat exams, because we know that exams really are not the best way of testing someone who's already in clinical practice. But at the same time, we want to give the public assurance that our physicians are maintaining the kinds of competencies that they need to be able to take care of patients.
But you know, I mean, that's essentially what being licensed and having a CME is obviously all about. I mean, you get 100 hours of CMEs a year in your discipline, you are licensed and all of this thing. It's a longer story, but certainly it's a very hot topic. So I realized as you were moving and responding, you keep like doing your hand like this and that. And I think you're trying to brag that you're wearing French cuffs. And I realized that this is maybe an invitation to me in the last few minutes about your fashion. And,
My
you
cufflink
know,
fetish.
no,
It
you
started.
also, you're definitely fashionable. I've always seen you, you know, dressed impeccable. So we're going to give your wife actually the credit to this because we know that otherwise you wouldn't be dressed nicely.
Either my wife or my kids. When my kids were young, my younger daughter in particular, she used to always like to come into my room the night before, the next day, and help me choose my shirt and tie so that they would match. And my kids, because I, for whatever reason, kind of got interested in French cuff shirts and cufflinks.
So
And so
do you always have French cuffs?
these upside down now.
No, do you always have French cuffs?
Always, but I would say almost all of my dress shirts are for a
We have
little.
a lot. Is it a lion face?
It's a bulldog.
It's a bulldog. Yeah, it's a
It's a
bulldog,
bulldog. And
right?
so my kids, when they were younger, Father's Day or Christmas or birthdays, I would get lots of cufflinks. So I have a ton of cufflinks. So it makes sense for me to get, and I just find the French cuff shirts more comfortable.
I love to wear cufflinks. Just take me like about 15 minutes to even put each one. I'm like, it's just like it's like a
I have to
whole. I
wake
need to
up
wake up 15
with-
minutes earlier just to do that French cuffs.
I bet you I can probably do my cufflinks almost as fast as you can button your shirt. Like I
You
get.
probably are more used to it. So listen, we've talked about your career, we've talked about disparities, we've talked about what you're doing currently, we talked about education and the fellowship program, we talked about communication. We've got a couple of minutes more because I know that you have a hard stop and you have to leave. And I always promise my guests I'll always adhere to this because otherwise they won't come back. And I
Well,
need
I'll
to
come
have you
back for you,
back.
man. Any day I'll come back for you.
Any parting thoughts? Anything else do you think we should have talked about that folks may be not aware of? I mean, I obviously intentionally did not talk about treatment of myeloma or anything because this was not really scientific. But maybe the one thing I will say that maybe we can, finish with is it seems that the world of myeloma on social media is the most active way of people debating each other, sometimes yelling at each other. The smoldering myeloma is up there, why we're doing CAR T for myeloma, smoldering MGUS, all of these things. I've never seen a field that is that active on social media debating the issues more than myeloma, honestly. Is it because you guys have too many treatments? Is it just it somehow rubs some people the wrong way? Tell me what's going on, unless my observation is completely off.
No, I think your observation is good. I try to take it in a non-confrontational way. I think those individuals that have become confrontational, have unfortunately let their egos get the better side of them. I think there's some important things we need to remember. One, there are patients on social media, as there should be, which is wonderful. But we want to be respectful in the way we say things and the way I try not to just overly praise or underly praise any drug or strategy because every drug has potential benefit, but also has risk. So when we just start saying, oh, this drug is totally toxic, why would you ever do it? And then there's a patient reading this that's actually on that drug and now is thinking, oh, maybe my doctor made a mistake. I think we have to be, of course, we always have to be respectful. That should be rule number one. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that there are differing opinions. And that's why there's so much discussion, Shadi, is because there is equipoise. There is still a lot to be learned in these areas. And so I try to take it in a respectful manner, in a kind-hearted manner. The quote I made when we started doing more social media at ASH, and I have the privilege now of serving on the executive ASH and have for many years. It's a wonderful organization. They do great things. I said that social media is the ultimate peer review, right? I mean,
True.
in many respects, it allows us a broader and a wider audience, but it comes with danger too. And so I hope that as a myeloma community, we become known as those that are willing to discuss respectfully and an evidence-based manner things in a social media forum so more people can be engaged, but not one that we would ever attack people. There are those who have done that, and I will not, and I encourage my trainees and fellows to never descend to that because it's really only going to lead them into trouble. And at the end of the day, we're here to help each other, man. We're not here to attack each other. And if we could diffuse a bit of the ego in medicine, sometimes as people get more senior in their career, I've often seen people go one of two paths, Shadi. They either go the path where they still always have to be in the forefront. They want to be on the podium. It has to be about them. And then there are those who say, no, I want to see other people thrive. I mean, if you ask me tomorrow, do I want my name or my mentee's name on the New England Journal? I want my mentee's name there. And I want a culture and attitude that says that. Sadly, some people, because myeloma has become their whole life, or whatever disease they treat as their whole life, that's all they can think of. I'm thankful that my life outside of medicine, my amazing wife, my kids, the running I love to do, the activities I have, my commitment to my church, these are the kinds of things that keep me grounded, because I realize that Dr. Joe is Dr. Joe at work, but he's just Joe at home, and I like it that way.
Well, Dr. Joe, Mikhael, thank you so much for spending some time with me. We got to know the human, the person behind the doctor. So really, not that they are separate from each other, but I enjoyed this immensely. I don't know if you know this, but we've been going for 50 minutes. So that tells you that we can actually go on for a long time. Thank you so much for coming on Healthcare Unfiltered.
Oh, thank you so much, Shadi, for providing this venue of human interaction. I could talk to you for hours, brother. I just think the world of you. Thank you for what you do for all of us. And I look forward to more.